My mother secretly plucked my toddler's hair for months, even breaking into my apartment to keep doing it, and gaslit everyone into thinking I was crazy. So I gave her a taste of her own medicine. My mother started babysitting my daughter, Lily, when I went back to work after maternity leave. Free childcare from grandma seemed perfect. Lily was 3, just starting to grow her hair long enough for little pigtails. She loved when I braided it before daycare on the days my mother couldn't watch her. But then Lily started coming home from grandma's house with bald patches. First, just a tiny spot behind her ear. My mother said Lily must have pulled it out herself. Kids do that sometimes, she said. Then another patch appeared on top. Then another by her temple. I took Lily to the pediatrician thinking maybe she had alopecia or trichotillomania. The doctor found nothing wrong but noticed the patches had a pattern. They were too precise, too deliberate. Someone was plucking her hair out. I confronted my mother immediately. She laughed, said I was being paranoid. But the next week, I dropped by unannounced and caught her with tweezers in her hand, Lily crying on her lap. She was plucking individual hairs from my daughter's hairline. "What are you doing?" I screamed. She didn't even look guilty. "Her hairline is uneven. I'm fixing it." I grabbed Lily and left. Told my mother she couldn't watch her anymore. But my mother had keys to my apartment from when she helped me move in. I'd come home from work and find new bald spots on Lily. My mother denied everything. Said I was imagining things, being hysterical. That maybe I was the one pulling Lily's hair for attention. I changed the locks. She convinced the building manager she was locked out while watching her granddaughter and got new keys made. I installed a camera. She covered it with tape and said it must have been Lily playing. I tried talking to my father, but he said my mother would never do something like that. My sister Jade said the same thing until she visited and saw my mother grab Lily's hair and yank 3 strands out because they were growing in the wrong direction. Even with a witness, my mother insisted she was helping. She said Lily's hair would grow back thicker, more even, that she was doing me a favor. I tried keeping Lily away completely, but my mother would show up at the playground, at the grocery store, at Lily's music class. She'd wait until I was distracted and pull out a few more hairs. The teacher at music class said she thought it was a nervous habit my mother had. Other parents started noticing Lily's patchy head and giving me looks like I was a bad parent. I couldn't explain that her grandmother was secretly assaulting her with tweezers. Who would believe that? Everything changed when my mother had minor surgery to remove a cyst. She needed someone to stay with her for a few days while she recovered. My father was out of town for work. Jade lived 3 hours away. Despite everything, I agreed to help because she was still my mother. She was on pain medication, sleeping most of the day. That's when I got my idea. The first night, I waited until she was deep asleep. The medication knocked her out completely. I took out my best tweezers, the really sharp ones I used for my eyebrows. I started with her left eyebrow, plucked out 5 hairs from the arch, then 5 from the right to match. She didn't even stir. The next morning, she looked in the mirror and frowned. "My eyebrows look weird," she said. "Must be the medication making you see things," I replied. That night, I took more. The tail end of both eyebrows, gone. A patch from the middle of the left one. She woke up confused, touching her face. "Something's wrong with my eyebrows," she kept saying. My father called and she complained to him. He said she was being dramatic, probably just tired from the surgery. Night 3, I got creative. I plucked random hairs throughout both eyebrows, leaving them completely uneven. One was half missing, the other had bald spots throughout. She woke up hysterical. "Someone's doing this to me," she cried. "Mom," I said calmly, "that's paranoid. Nobody's touching your eyebrows. Maybe you're pulling them out in your sleep." She went to Jade's house to recover instead. But I'd already talked to Jade, gave her tweezers as a gift. Really nice ones. Jade continued the work. My mother's eyebrows got worse and worse. She tried drawing them on, but couldn't get them even. She went to 3 different doctors. They all said the same thing. Sometimes stress causes hair loss. Maybe she had trichotillomania. She started wearing hats pulled down low to cover her missing eyebrows. But at family dinner, at church, at her book club, people noticed. They whispered. They stared. She bought false eyebrows, but they looked ridiculous and kept falling off during conversations. After 2 weeks of this, she called me crying. "I know it's you," she said. "I know you're doing something to my eyebrows." I told her exactly what I did. Every single hair I pulled from her left eyebrow while she was knocked out on pain medication. The 5 from the arch, the patch from the middle, the random ones scattered throughout. I described how her face looked in the lamplight, peaceful and unaware, while I worked with my sharp tweezers. The silence stretched so long I checked my phone screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then I heard it. Her breathing, fast and ragged like she couldn't get enough air. She started making these small gasping sounds that might have been crying, or might have been something worse. The crying came next, full force. She begged me to stop, her words tumbling over each other. She understood now, she said. She knew how terrible it felt to have someone violate your body while you were helpless. She never meant to hurt Lily. It was just a few hairs. She was trying to help. Her voice cracked on that last word, and I felt something twist in my chest, but I didn't speak. I let her apologies hang in the air between us. I'd heard these same words before, back when she had power and I had none. Back when she could walk into my apartment whenever she wanted and pull hair from my daughter's head while I was at work. Her apologies meant nothing then. I waited until she ran out of words. Then I told her the truth about what happens next. Every time she comes near Lily without my explicit written permission, I'll pluck more hairs. Every time she shows up at the playground or the grocery store or music class, more hairs disappear. Jade has tweezers too, I said. Really nice ones that I gave her as a gift. She knows exactly what to do and she's willing to do it. My mother made a choking sound that turned into something between a sob and a laugh. She asked how I could do this to my own mother. The irony almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I told her I learned from the best and ended the call. Austin found me on the couch 20 minutes later. I was still holding my phone, staring at the black screen. He dropped his work bag by the door and came over, his footsteps soft on the carpet. He asked if I was okay, and I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. I didn't know the answer. Part of me felt powerful, like I'd finally taken control after months of being helpless. Part of me felt sick, like I'd crossed some line I couldn't uncross. He sat down next to me and waited. I told him about the phone call, about my mother's breathing and crying and begging. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked if I felt better now. I still didn't know the answer to that either. That night, I lay in bed next to Austin, listening to him breathe in the darkness. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice breaking as she realized what I'd done. The way she gasped when I described plucking her eyebrows while she slept. The choking sound when I told her it would continue. I rolled onto my side, then my back, then my other side. Austin shifted in his sleep but didn't wake. Part of me felt vindicated. She finally understood what it was like to have someone violate your body without permission. To be gaslit and told you were imagining things. To feel helpless and scared and confused. But another part of me wondered if I'd become exactly what I was fighting against. If using her own tactics made me just as bad as her. Morning came too fast. Lily wandered into the kitchen while I was making coffee, dragging her favorite stuffed rabbit by one ear. She climbed onto a chair and asked why we haven't seen Grandma in so long. I poured milk into my coffee and thought about how to answer. I told her Grandma was sick right now but getting better. Lily's face scrunched up with concern. She asked if Grandma had a cold. I said something like that. Yes. Lily accepted this explanation without question and slid off the chair. She went back to the living room where her dolls were scattered across the carpet. I watched her play, her hair catching the morning light. The bald patches were growing back, but the new hair came in uneven, some spots thicker than others. Every time I looked at them, my heart broke a little. Those patches were proof of what my mother had done, visible evidence that would take months to fully disappear. 2 days passed without any contact from my mother. Then my father called. His voice sounded different, tired in a way I'd never heard before. He asked if I could meet him for coffee without my mother knowing. He needed to talk to me about something important, something he found. I agreed immediately because the tone in his voice told me this was serious. He suggested a coffee shop across town, one where nobody from our family ever went. I knew the place. It was in a strip mall near the highway, the kind of anonymous location where you could have difficult conversations without running into people you knew. I got there first and ordered a black coffee I didn't really want. The shop was mostly empty except for a woman working on a laptop in the corner and a teenager behind the counter scrolling through his phone. My father walked in 10 minutes later. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes had dark circles under them and his shirt was wrinkled like he'd pulled it from the laundry basket without ironing it. He ordered coffee and sat down across from me. For a long moment, he just stared at his cup. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was hair. Blonde hair, fine and baby soft. Lily's hair. The bag had dates written on it in my mother's handwriting. July 15th, July 22nd, August 3rd, August 10th. The list went on. 4 months of dates, 4 months of evidence. My father's voice cracked when he spoke. He found the bag in my mother's purse when he was looking for his car keys, hidden in a zippered pocket along with her tweezers. He didn't want to believe it at first. He thought maybe there was some explanation, but then he confronted her and she admitted everything. She'd been collecting Lily's hair like some kind of trophy. He started crying right there in the middle of the coffee shop. Tears ran down his face and he didn't bother wiping them away. He said he should have believed me from the beginning. That he enabled abuse because it was easier than confronting his wife. That he failed as a father and as a grandfather. His shoulders shook and other customers started glancing over. I didn't reach across the table to comfort him. His guilt wasn't my responsibility. But I did listen. He pulled himself together after a few minutes, wiping his face with napkins from the dispenser. He asked what happened to my mother's eyebrows. His voice was quiet, almost scared of the answer. I told him the truth without apology or justification. I described waiting until she was asleep, taking my tweezers, plucking hair after hair while she was helpless. I told him about coordinating with Jade, about the systematic destruction of her eyebrows over 2 weeks. I watched his face as I talked. He sat back in his chair, his coffee forgotten. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then slowly, he nodded. He said he understood why I did it, even if he wished there had been another way. But we both knew there wasn't another way. Nothing else had worked. I laid it all out for him without holding back. She had keys to my apartment that she got from the building manager. She showed up at the playground, the grocery store, Lily's music class. I changed the locks twice, and she found ways around it every time. I installed a camera, and she covered it with tape. Nothing stopped her from getting to my daughter. My father's face went pale. He stared at his coffee cup like he might find answers in the bottom. Then he admitted something that made my stomach turn. He knew about the building manager giving her new keys. He knew she convinced Grayson to let her in by saying she was locked out while babysitting. My father heard about it and said nothing because he thought I was overreacting about the whole situation. The coffee shop felt too small suddenly. The air too thick. I wanted to leave, but I stayed because we weren't done yet. We talked for 2 hours straight. My father asked questions he should have asked months ago. He listened when I described finding new bald spots on Lily every single day. He didn't interrupt when I told him about other parents staring at us. About the music teacher thinking it was just a nervous habit. About feeling crazy because nobody believed me. For the first time since this started, my father really heard me instead of defending his wife. He apologized over and over, but I didn't want apologies. I wanted action. He promised to get my mother into therapy. Real therapy with someone who specialized in whatever was wrong with her. He said he'd make sure she never had unsupervised access to Lily again. That he'd be there for every single visit if we ever got to that point. He pulled out his phone right there and started looking up therapists. I watched him scroll through options, making notes, his hands shaking slightly. Before we left, he hugged me. I couldn't remember the last time my father hugged me like that. Tight and desperate, like he was trying to hold together something already broken. A week passed with no contact from my mother. 7 full days of silence. It was the longest we'd gone without speaking in my entire adult life. She usually called me 3 times a day minimum, texted constantly, showed up unannounced. The quiet felt strange at first. I kept expecting my phone to ring, kept checking the peephole before opening my apartment door, kept looking over my shoulder at the grocery store. But slowly, the silence became peaceful. I could breathe without waiting for the next violation. Lily and I had normal days where I didn't spend every second watching for tweezers or checking her head for new bald spots. We went to the park, and I actually played with her instead of scanning the area for my mother. We made dinner together, and I didn't jump every time someone walked past our door. The apartment felt safe again. Like it belonged to us instead of being a place my mother could invade whenever she wanted. My phone rang on day 8. Jade's name appeared on the screen. I answered, and she sounded breathless, like she'd been running. Our mother showed up at her apartment that morning. Just appeared at the door without calling first, without asking. Exactly like she used to do to me. Jade refused to let her inside. She stood in the doorway and told our mother she needed a genuine apology first. A real one that acknowledged what she did to Lily. My mother apparently stood outside Jade's apartment for an hour. Jade watched through the peephole as our mother paced the hallway, touched her face repeatedly, adjusted the hat she was wearing. Her eyebrows were drawn on, so badly that when neighbors came out of their apartments, they stared. One elderly woman asked if she was okay. My mother finally left when Jade threatened to call the police. Jade said she felt terrible but also relieved, like she'd finally stood up to our mother for the first time in her life. We talked for a while about how hard it was to set boundaries with someone who never respected them. Jade admitted she almost opened the door twice. Almost gave in because that's what we'd always done. But thinking about Lily's bald patches kept her strong. I took Lily to see Marlene for a follow-up appointment 2 days later. The pediatrician's office smelled like antiseptic and children's vitamins. Lily sat on the examination table swinging her legs while Marlene checked her scalp carefully. The hair was growing back normally now. Still patchy and uneven, but growing without interference. Marlene smiled for the first time since this whole thing started. She ran her fingers through Lily's hair gently, examining the new growth pattern. Then she looked at me and asked if the situation at home had been resolved. Her voice was careful, professional, but concerned. I told her yes, it was safe now. My mother didn't have access to Lily anymore. Real boundaries existed and were being enforced. Marlene nodded slowly and made notes in Lily's chart. Before we left, she mentioned a family therapist named Nolan who specialized in boundary violations and family trauma. She wrote his name and number on a prescription pad and handed it to me. She suggested I call him, that what happened to Lily was serious and we might need help processing it. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, knowing she was right. I made an appointment with Nolan for myself first. I needed to process what I did and why before I could help Lily heal. His office was in a building downtown, 3rd floor. Plain door with just his name on it. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines nobody ever read. Nolan was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with glasses and a calm voice that made the room feel safe. That first session was harder than I expected. He asked me to examine whether revenge actually made me feel better or just transferred the trauma. I sat there for a long time not knowing how to answer. Part of me felt vindicated watching my mother experience what she put Lily through. Part of me felt sick about plucking her eyebrows while she slept drugged and helpless. I told Nolan I didn't have a good answer and he said that was okay, that sitting with discomfort was part of the process. We spent the rest of the session talking about control and powerlessness, about how trauma makes people do things they never thought they'd do. He didn't judge me for the revenge, but he didn't congratulate me either. He just helped me look at it honestly. Austin and I had a long conversation that night after Lily went to bed. We sat on the couch with the TV off, just talking in the dim light from the kitchen. He admitted he was disturbed by the revenge, but understood why I felt it was necessary. He'd watched me try everything else first, watched my mother violate every boundary, watched me become desperate and exhausted. But then he asked a question I hadn't considered. Was I done now, or did I plan to keep punishing my mother? I realized I hadn't thought that far ahead. The revenge started as a way to make her understand, but I didn't know when to stop. Austin held my hand and said he'd support whatever I decided, but he wanted me to think about what I actually wanted from this. Did I want my mother to suffer indefinitely, or did I want her to change? I didn't answer right away because I honestly didn't know. I spent 2 days thinking about Austin's question. The eyebrow plucking started to feel less like justice and more like torture. The point was to make her understand what she did to Lily, to force her to experience the helplessness and violation. But continuing it forever didn't serve that purpose. It just made me into someone who hurt people while they slept. I decided to stop. I texted Jade and told her to stop too. She agreed immediately, said she'd been feeling uncomfortable with it anyway. But she added that our mother needed to earn back any trust through consistent changed behavior, not just words or promises. I agreed completely. The revenge was over, but forgiveness wasn't automatic. 3 weeks after my mother's tearful phone call, my father showed up at my door with an envelope. He looked tired but less stressed than at the coffee shop. He said my mother wrote me a letter and asked him to deliver it instead of showing up herself. The envelope was thick, multiple pages folded inside. I took it but didn't open it while he was there. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out 5 pages covered in my mother's handwriting. The letter was written over multiple days based on the different pen colors and handwriting styles. Blue ink for the first 2 pages, black for the next one, then blue again, then pencil for the last page like she'd run out of pens and couldn't stop writing. I read through the first page. The words were hard to make out because my mother's handwriting got messy when she was upset. She wrote about how perfect Lily looked when she was born, how everyone at the hospital said she had the most beautiful baby hair they'd ever seen. My mother wrote that she wanted to keep Lily looking perfect, that she thought fixing small things would help. She admitted she started with one hair that was sticking up wrong, then another, then she couldn't stop looking for more hairs to fix. The second page was darker, written in black ink with harder pressure. My mother wrote that she knew it was wrong, but she kept doing it anyway. She described watching Lily cry and still reaching for the tweezers because the uneven patches bothered her more than the crying did. She wrote that she lied to everyone because admitting the truth meant admitting she hurt her granddaughter on purpose, over and over, for months. The third page went back to blue ink, and the handwriting was neater, like she'd calmed down while writing. She explained that Lily's appearance felt like a test of her own worth as a grandmother. If Lily looked perfect, that meant my mother was doing everything right. If Lily had messy hair or uneven growth, that meant my mother was failing. She wrote that she became obsessed with fixing every tiny flaw because she saw each one as her own personal failure. The fourth page talked about therapy. My mother wrote that she started seeing someone twice a week right after the eyebrow situation ended. The therapist diagnosed her with obsessive-compulsive disorder that showed up as needing to control how Lily looked. My mother wrote that the diagnosis didn't make what she did okay, but it helped explain why she couldn't stop even when she knew it was hurting Lily. She described the intrusive thoughts about Lily's hair, how they got louder and more demanding until she gave in and plucked more hairs. The last page was written in pencil with shaky handwriting. My mother asked if we could work toward supervised visits with Lily someday. She wrote that she understood it might take months or years to earn back any trust. She promised to never have tweezers anywhere near Lily again, and said she'd follow any rules I set, no matter how strict. She ended the letter by writing that she loved Lily and me, and that she was sorry for making us both feel unsafe. I folded the letter back up and put it in the envelope. My hands were shaking. Part of me wanted to rip it up because words on paper didn't undo months of abuse and gaslighting. But another part of me recognized that this was the first time my mother had taken real responsibility, without making excuses or blaming me. I scheduled an emergency session with Nolan for the next day. I brought the letter with me and handed it to him as soon as I sat down. He read through all 5 pages while I sat there picking at my fingernails and trying not to cry. When he finished, he set the letter down on the table between us and asked what I thought about it. I told him it felt more real than anything my mother had said before, but I didn't know if that meant anything. Nolan spent the next hour helping me understand the difference between real accountability and performative apology. He explained that real accountability includes admitting what happened, taking full responsibility, explaining without excusing, and committing to specific changes. Performative apology focuses on the apologizer's feelings, asks for immediate forgiveness, and doesn't include concrete plans for change. We went through my mother's letter point by point. Nolan helped me see that she'd admitted to the abuse clearly, taken responsibility without blaming anyone else, explained her thought process without using it as an excuse, and offered to follow my rules for future contact. He said this was actual accountability, not just empty words meant to manipulate me into forgiving her quickly. Then Nolan asked what specific changes I needed to see before I'd consider any contact between my mother and Lily. I made a list while we talked. Continued therapy twice a week with proof from her therapist. No surprise visits to my apartment, the playground, or anywhere else. No comments about Lily's appearance at all, even compliments. Supervised contact only, with me or Austin present the entire time. No physical contact with Lily's hair for any reason. 6 months of respecting all boundaries before we'd discuss any visits. Nolan helped me write everything down clearly so there wouldn't be any confusion about what I expected. That night, I drafted a letter back to my mother. I didn't write it directly to her because I still wasn't ready for that kind of contact. Instead, I wrote it as a list of requirements and gave it to my father to deliver. The letter was short and specific. It listed all 6 requirements from my therapy session and stated that I'd agree to supervised visits only after 6 months of my mother following every single rule. I didn't include any emotional content or personal thoughts, just the facts about what needed to happen. My father called 2 days later and said my mother agreed to everything immediately. She'd already given him permission to contact her therapist to confirm she was attending sessions. She promised not to come anywhere near our apartment or the places we usually went. She said she understood about the 6-month waiting period and wouldn't push for faster contact. I felt suspicious of how quickly she agreed because my mother usually fought against any boundaries. But my father said the eyebrow situation had really changed something in her, that experiencing what she'd done to Lily made her understand in a way that words never could. Austin came up with the idea of documenting Lily's hair growth with weekly photos. He said it would give us a record of her physical healing and help us see the progress when everything felt overwhelming. We started taking pictures every Sunday morning in the same spot by the living room window. The first few photos showed all the bald patches clearly, some of them bigger than I'd realized. But each week we could see tiny hairs starting to grow back in. The new growth came in lighter than her original hair color and stuck up in different directions. Lily thought it was funny that she had baby hairs growing like a newborn, even though she was 3 years old. After a month of photos, I was amazed at how much had filled in already. Kids heal so much faster than adults, both physically and emotionally. Lily started asking more questions about why Grandma couldn't visit anymore. At first, I'd just said Grandma was sick and needed time to get better. But Lily kept asking when Grandma would be all better, and I realized I needed to give her a more honest answer. I sat down with Lily one afternoon while she was coloring and told her that Grandma made unsafe choices that hurt Lily's body. I explained that Grandma pulled Lily's hair out on purpose, and that wasn't okay for anyone to do. Lily touched the spots on her head that were growing back and asked if that's why they'd been bald. I said yes, and that Grandma needed to learn how to make safe choices before she could visit again. Lily seemed to understand in the simple way 3-year-olds do. She asked if Grandma was in timeout like when she had to sit in the corner at daycare. I said yes. That was exactly right. Adults sometimes need timeouts too when they make bad choices. Lily nodded and went back to coloring like this made perfect sense to her. Jade drove down for a weekend visit about 2 months after everything happened. We put Lily to bed early and stayed up late talking in the living room. Jade brought up memories from our childhood that I'd almost forgotten, times when our mother had been controlling about our appearance too. She reminded me about how our mother used to cut my bangs too short because she thought they looked better that way, even though I cried every time. Jade talked about how our mother threw away her favorite shirt in middle school because the color didn't look good on her. We realized the controlling behavior had always been there, but we'd written it off as normal mom stuff. Having a grandchild seemed to make it worse. Like my mother saw Lily as a second chance to create the perfect child. We both felt terrible that we hadn't protected Lily sooner, that we'd normalized behavior that should have been a huge red flag. Jade said she should have believed me right away instead of defending our mother. I said I should have cut off contact completely the first time I caught her with the tweezers. We sat there feeling guilty together until we remembered that our mother was the one who'd made the choice to hurt Lily repeatedly. We were victims of her gaslighting too. My father started calling once a month with updates on my mother's therapy progress. He'd never been this involved or proactive before. Usually he just went along with whatever my mother wanted and stayed out of any conflict. But now he was actively participating and holding her accountable. He told me that my mother's therapist was helping her understand why she'd needed such extreme control over Lily's appearance. The therapist traced it back to my mother's own childhood, and her mother's obsession with looking perfect in public. My father said my mother was working on breaking the pattern so it wouldn't continue to the next generation. 4 months after I'd sent the requirements letter, another envelope arrived from my mother through my father. This one was much shorter, just 1 page. She asked if she could send Lily birthday gifts even though she couldn't see her in person yet. She wrote that she understood if I said no, but she wanted Lily to know she was thinking about her on her birthday. I thought about it for a few days before deciding to allow it. I wrote back through my father saying she could send gifts, but I'd be inspecting everything carefully before giving anything to Lily. The gifts arrived a week before Lily's 4th birthday. 3 wrapped packages with cards attached. I opened everything while Lily was at daycare. The first package contained a set of wooden blocks with letters on them. The second had a picture book about a little girl and her grandmother. The third was a stuffed elephant that played music when you squeezed it. I checked every item carefully, looking for anything weird or controlling, but they were just normal toys and books. No hair accessories, no grooming items, nothing that related to appearance at all. The cards were simple too, just basic birthday wishes without any guilt trips or manipulation. I gave the gifts to Lily on her birthday and she loved all of them, especially the elephant. I stopped checking the locks obsessively after about 3 weeks. The apartment felt different now. Lighter somehow. Like I could actually breathe without waiting for something bad to happen. I'd catch myself walking past the front door without testing the handle, and it would take me a second to realize I'd forgotten to verify it was secure. That constant knot in my stomach started loosening bit by bit, until one morning I woke up and realized I'd slept through the whole night without jerking awake to check on Lily. Austin noticed the change too. He said I seemed more relaxed, that my shoulders weren't up around my ears anymore. I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying that tension until it was gone. The apartment was finally ours again. Just a place we lived instead of a fortress I had to defend every single day. Lily's hair grew back slowly over the next 6 months. The pattern wasn't quite the same as before because some spots grew in thicker, while others came in finer and lighter. She'd touch the places that used to be bald patches, and ask me if the hair would fall out again. I'd kneel down to her level and promise that no, it would stay this time, that nobody was going to hurt her anymore. She seemed to believe me in that simple way kids do, accepting my words as absolute truth. By the time she turned 4, her head was completely covered again, little brown waves that I braided every morning before daycare. She loved having enough hair for pigtails again, and would stand in front of the mirror admiring them while I got her backpack ready. My therapy sessions with Nolan got into complicated territory around month 5. He brought up the revenge during one session, and asked me to really examine whether it had made me feel better, or just transferred the trauma onto someone else. I sat there picking at my cuticles and admitted I still didn't know the answer. Part of me felt powerful and vindicated, like I'd finally made my mother understand what she'd done to Lily. But another part felt sick about drugging someone and plucking their eyebrows while they were helpless. Nolan nodded and said both things could be true at the same time, that the revenge wasn't ideal, but it had been effective when literally nothing else worked. He emphasized that the important thing now was breaking the cycle, and making sure I didn't repeat any controlling behaviors with Lily as she got older. That hit me hard because I'd been so focused on protecting her from my mother that I hadn't thought about what patterns I might be absorbing myself. Austin brought up having another baby one night while we were doing dishes. He said it casually, like he was just floating the idea, but I could tell he'd been thinking about it for a while. I dried my hands on a towel and told him honestly that I needed to fully heal from everything that happened before I could even consider it. The thought of being vulnerable with a newborn while still processing all this trauma made my chest tight. He put his arm around me and said Lily was enough for now, that we had plenty of time to decide when I felt truly safe. I leaned into him and felt grateful that he understood without me having to explain all the fear and anxiety still lurking under the surface. 7 months after I'd plucked my mother's eyebrows, my father called with an unusual request. He asked if I'd be willing to meet with both my parents together in a neutral location with Nolan present. My stomach dropped and I almost said no immediately. The thought of being in the same room with my mother made my hands shake, but I also wanted to see if her changes were real or just performance, if the therapy was actually working, or if she was just going through the motions to get access to Lily again. I agreed on the condition that Nolan would be there the whole time, and we'd meet somewhere public where I could leave if I needed to. The family therapy session happened 2 weeks later in Nolan's office. My mother sat across from me looking smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched and her hands folded in her lap. Her eyebrows had grown back, but they were uneven and patchy, a visible reminder of what I'd done. Nolan started by setting ground rules about listening without defending or interrupting. My mother nodded and said she understood. Then she looked directly at me and apologized for the gaslighting, her voice shaking. She said she knew how scary it must have been to have her reality constantly denied, to be told she was crazy when she knew exactly what was happening. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize what she'd done. She just sat there and took responsibility while tears ran down her face. My mother pulled out a notebook from her bag and showed us pages of therapy homework. There were detailed logs of intrusive thoughts about controlling appearances, entries about when the urges hit, and what coping strategies she'd tried. She'd written down every time she wanted to fix someone's hair or clothes or makeup, and what she did instead to redirect the compulsion. The level of detail surprised me because it showed genuine effort to understand and change her behavior. She talked about how her therapist was helping her trace the pattern back to her own childhood, and her mother's obsession with looking perfect. I'd never heard her talk about my grandmother this way before, acknowledging the damage that had been passed down through generations. I took a deep breath and told my mother exactly how the hair plucking had affected Lily. I described finding her crying in her room touching the bald spots, asking why Grandma kept hurting her. I talked about the confusion on her face when I tried to explain that what was happening wasn't normal or okay. I described how other kids at daycare had started asking questions, and how Lily had become self-conscious about her appearance at only 3 years old. My mother's face crumpled and she started sobbing, her whole body shaking. She covered her face with her hands and kept saying she was sorry over and over. This time the tears seemed different, like real remorse instead of the self-pity or manipulation I'd seen before. She wasn't crying about what happened to her or how unfair everything was. She was crying about what she'd done to Lily. Nolan let the emotions settle before moving the conversation towards supervised visits. He asked what would make me feel safe enough to allow contact between my mother and Lily. I said I needed to see consistent boundary respect over time. not just promises. We agreed to start with 1-hour meetings at a public park with both me and Austin present. My mother would not be allowed to touch Lily's hair or make any comments about her appearance whatsoever. She agreed immediately and said she'd follow whatever rules I set. My father promised to help enforce the boundaries and said he'd be at every visit too. We scheduled the first one for 2 weeks out to give everyone time to prepare. The day of the first supervised visit, I was a mess. I barely slept the night before and spent the morning watching Lily play, while anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. Austin kept asking if I was sure I wanted to do this, and I kept saying yes even though I wasn't sure at all. We got to the park early and I scoped out the area, picking a spot near the playground where other families were around. My mother arrived exactly on time with my father. She walked slowly toward us and stopped a few feet away, waiting for permission to come closer. I nodded and she approached carefully, kneeling down to Lily's level. She said hi and asked if Lily wanted to play on the swings. Lily looked at me for approval and I nodded again. I followed them to the swing set and stood close enough to intervene if needed. My mother pushed Lily gently and talked about normal things like the weather and the birds in the trees. I watched her hands the entire time, hyper-vigilant for any movement toward Lily's head. She kept them on the swing chains or at her sides. When Lily's hair fell in her face, my mother visibly stopped herself from reaching up to fix it. She turned away and took a deep breath instead, using whatever coping strategy her therapist had taught her. The hour passed slowly with me monitoring every interaction. My mother stayed awkward and overly careful the whole time, but she kept her promise. She didn't touch Lily's hair once and focused on playing instead of grooming. Lily stayed behind me at first, gripping my leg and peeking around at my mother with worried eyes. My mother crouched down slowly and pulled a small bottle of bubbles from her purse, holding it out without moving closer. Lily watched the bottle for a long moment before letting go of my leg and taking 3 careful steps forward. My mother blew a stream of bubbles that caught the sunlight and floated across the playground, and Lily laughed and chased after them. I watched my mother's hands the entire time, tracking every movement, every gesture. When a bubble landed in Lily's hair, my mother reached up automatically, then stopped herself mid-motion. She pulled her hand back and clenched it at her side, taking a visible breath before blowing more bubbles instead. Austin stood beside me and squeezed my shoulder, but I couldn't relax even as Lily started to warm up. My mother pulled out sidewalk chalk next and drew a hopscotch pattern on the pavement, and Lily hopped through the squares while my mother clapped and cheered. The whole interaction felt stiff and rehearsed, like my mother was performing rather than connecting, but she kept her distance and didn't try to touch Lily's hair once. When Lily's ponytail came loose and hair fell across her face, my mother turned away completely and focused on drawing more chalk patterns. The hour crawled by with me monitoring every second, but my mother followed every rule exactly. After the visit ended, my mother walked over to where Austin and I stood by the car. She thanked me quietly for giving her the chance to see Lily, and her voice sounded genuine instead of manipulative. She didn't push for more time or try to negotiate different terms, just asked if we could do another visit in 2 weeks under the same conditions. I agreed because she'd actually respected the boundaries for once, something she'd never managed to do before. My father shook Austin's hand and told me they'd see us in 2 weeks, then walked my mother back to their car. I strapped Lily into her car seat and she chattered about the bubbles and chalk, already moving past the awkwardness that had made me so tense. Austin drove us home and I stared out the window, feeling exhausted from the constant watching. Over the next 3 months, we added more visits gradually. First every 2 weeks, then every week, then twice a week. Always at public parks or playgrounds where other families were around. Always with me and Austin present, watching. My mother showed up on time for every single visit and left exactly when the hour ended. She brought appropriate activities like coloring books, stickers, and outdoor toys that didn't require physical contact. When Lily asked her to do a French braid, my mother said that was Mommy's special skill and suggested they build a sandcastle instead. I watched for any signs of the old controlling behavior creeping back, any attempt to fix Lily's appearance or make comments about her hair. My mother caught herself reaching toward Lily's head multiple times, but each time she stopped and redirected her hands to something else. The visits stayed supervised and structured, but they got easier as my mother proved she could maintain boundaries consistently. Jade drove down for one of the park visits about 4 months after we'd started them. She sat on the bench next to me while my mother pushed Lily on the swings, and we both watched carefully. Jade noticed how my mother kept her hands on the swing chains and talked to Lily about normal things like favorite colors and animals. When the visit ended and my mother left without drama, Jade turned to me and said our mother seemed genuinely different in how she interacted with Lily. We talked about staying cautious because people can slip back into old patterns, but Jade acknowledged that consistent therapy and real consequences seemed to be creating actual change. Neither of us fully trusted it yet, but we couldn't deny the progress we were seeing. My mother's eyebrows had grown back over the months, but they came in patchy and uneven. She could have gotten them shaped professionally or used makeup to fix them, but she left them exactly as they grew. During one of our supervised visits, she told me she looks at them every morning in the mirror and remembers why she goes to therapy twice a week. She said the uneven eyebrows remind her of what she put Lily through, of how it felt to have someone violate her body without permission. The visible reminder felt like real accountability instead of empty words, something concrete she carried with her that showed she understood what she'd done. 10 months after the initial confrontation in Nolan's office, he suggested during one of our family sessions that we were ready to transition to less frequent group therapy. He'd been seeing my mother individually, me individually, and all of us together, and he said the progress impressed him. We'd established a foundation for healthier relationships with clear boundaries and consistent respect. He recommended we move to monthly family check-ins instead of weekly sessions, with my mother and me continuing individual work. My mother agreed immediately, and thanked Nolan for helping her understand her behavior patterns. I felt nervous about reducing the structured oversight, but Nolan pointed out that real change has to work outside the therapy office too. I started meeting my mother for coffee once a month, just the two of us without Lily present. We'd sit in a small cafe downtown and talk honestly about our relationship, about the damage that had been done, and the work still needed. My mother listened more than she talked during these meetings, which was completely different from before. She asked questions about my life, about work, and Austin, and how I was feeling, instead of trying to control or fix everything. The conversations felt awkward at first because we'd never related to each other this way, but they got easier as months passed. My mother told me about insights from therapy and patterns she was working to break, and I shared my own healing process. During one of these coffee meetings, my mother talked about her own childhood for the first time. She told me her mother was extremely controlling about appearance, criticizing every outfit and hairstyle, making her feel like her worth depended on looking perfect. Her mother would fix her hair and clothes constantly, never letting her make her own choices about her body. My mother said she'd unconsciously repeated the same cycle with Lily, trying to create the perfect-looking grandchild, because that's what she'd been taught mattered most. Understanding the generational pattern helped me feel some compassion for her without excusing what she'd done to Lily. The cycle had to break somewhere, and I'd made sure it broke with my daughter. Austin commented one evening that I seemed lighter and happier than I'd been in years. We were making dinner together while Lily played in the living room, and he said I looked more relaxed than he could remember. I realized he was right because the constant stress of protecting Lily from my mother had been affecting everything. My sleep, my work, my relationship with Austin, even how I parented. Now that real boundaries existed and were actually being respected, I could enjoy being a parent instead of constantly being on guard. The hypervigilance had faded gradually as my mother proved through consistent actions that she'd changed. Lily turned 4 in early spring, and we planned a birthday party at our apartment for the first time in over a year. I invited my mother and father, along with Jade and a few of Lily's friends from preschool. My mother arrived exactly on time with a wrapped present, a set of building blocks that was age-appropriate and normal. She stayed for the agreed-upon 2 hours, playing party games with the kids and helping clean up spilled juice without trying to take over. When the time came to leave, she hugged Lily goodbye, thanked me for including her, and left without any drama or boundary pushing. I watched her walk to the car with my father and felt something shift inside me, a tiny bit of hope that maybe we could actually build something healthier from all this damage. At the party, I stood by the snack table watching my mother kneel down next to Lily. They were looking at a picture book together, my mother pointing at the illustrations while Lily giggled. My mother's face looked relaxed and happy instead of that tight, focused expression she used to get when she was trying to control every little detail about Lily's appearance. She smiled when Lily turned the page too fast and missed a picture, just going back without any comment about doing it wrong. I watched her hands stay in her lap the whole time, never reaching toward Lily's hair even when a strand fell across my daughter's face. The difference was so obvious that it made my chest feel tight. She wasn't trying to fix Lily anymore, wasn't seeing her as a project that needed work. She was just enjoying being with her granddaughter. My father came over and touched my elbow, leading me away from the other guests into the hallway. His eyes looked wet and he grabbed both my hands. He told me the therapy and consequences saved his marriage, that he almost lost my mother completely when she hit rock bottom after the eyebrow situation. He said watching her do the work to change herself was the hardest thing he'd ever witnessed, but it showed him who she really was underneath all that need for control. Then he looked at me and his voice cracked when he said he should have protected me and Lily sooner, instead of making excuses for behavior he knew was wrong. He admitted he was scared of confronting my mother because it was easier to pretend everything was normal than deal with how sick she'd become. I told him I appreciated hearing that even though it didn't fix what happened. He nodded and wiped his eyes, saying he was grateful I gave them another chance when I had every right to walk away forever. Jade found me in the kitchen cutting more birthday cake. She leaned against the counter and said our relationship felt different now, lighter somehow. We weren't spending every conversation talking about what my mother did, or planning how to protect Lily, or dealing with the latest boundary violation. She said it was like we could finally just be sisters instead of constantly being in crisis mode together. We made plans to visit each other more often and start our own traditions that had nothing to do with our parents. She wanted to take Lily to the zoo in her city, and I wanted to come stay with her for a weekend without kids, just us doing sister stuff. We talked about how weird it felt to have normal family gatherings again where we weren't on guard the whole time. She admitted she felt guilty sometimes for helping with the eyebrow revenge, but then she remembered how my mother gaslit everyone and broke into my apartment and she stopped feeling bad. I told her I felt the same way, that the revenge wasn't pretty, but it worked when nothing else did. 6 months after the birthday party, I sat in Nolan's office for our regular session. He said he thought we were ready to try unsupervised visits in my apartment with me in the next room instead of right there watching. My stomach dropped when he suggested it because the idea of leaving Lily alone with my mother still made me nervous even after all the progress. He reminded me this was a trial period and I could stop at any time if I saw any concerning behaviors return. I agreed but told him I needed to start with very short visits, maybe 30 minutes maximum. He said that was smart, and we'd build up slowly as my comfort level increased. The first unsupervised visit happened on a Saturday morning. My mother arrived exactly on time carrying a bag of building blocks she'd bought. I let her in and told Lily that Grandma was going to play in the living room while I made lunch in the kitchen. Lily grabbed my mother's hand and pulled her toward the toy box. I went to the kitchen but left the door open, so I could hear everything. I stood at the counter pretending to chop vegetables while I listened to them play. My mother's voice stayed calm and happy the whole time. She asked Lily what she wanted to build, and followed my daughter's ideas instead of taking over. When Lily knocked down a tower by accident, my mother just laughed and said they could build it again. At one point, I heard Lily ask my mother to do a braid in her hair. My whole body went tense and I almost rushed into the living room. But then I heard my mother say that braids were Mommy's special job and she wasn't as good at them. She suggested they play with the blocks instead. I had to sit down at the kitchen table because my legs felt shaky. She'd actually redirected away from touching Lily's hair even when my daughter asked for it. Over the next few months, the unsupervised visits got longer and more relaxed. My mother learned which games Lily liked best and brought new books to read together. She focused on activities like building blocks, pretend play with dolls, and reading stories that didn't involve any physical grooming. I stopped listening from the next room because the anxiety faded each time nothing bad happened. Sometimes I'd walk past the living room and see them playing on the floor together, both of them laughing about something silly. My mother never once tried to fix Lily's clothes or smooth her hair or make any comments about her appearance. She'd learned to enjoy Lily as a person, instead of treating her like a doll that needed constant adjusting. One afternoon, my mother asked if she could take Lily to music class again like she used to before everything happened. I was nervous but agreed to go with them the first few times. At the class, my mother sat with the other grandparents in the chairs along the wall instead of hovering near Lily. She clapped during the songs and smiled when Lily danced around, but she stayed in her seat the whole time. The teacher came over to me after the third class and said she noticed how much more relaxed both my mother and Lily seemed. She said whatever changes we'd made at home were really helping Lily feel more confident and free during class. I realized one day that I'd stopped constantly watching my mother's behavior. The hypervigilance that made me exhausted for so long was finally fading because she'd proven through consistent actions that she'd changed. I didn't check my phone nervously during her visits anymore, or rush home early from errands to make sure everything was okay. I trusted her enough to be alone with Lily for a few hours without feeling sick with worry. Austin noticed the change too and said I seemed happier and lighter than I'd been in years. He was right because that constant stress of protecting Lily had been affecting everything about my life. My sleep was better, work was easier, and I could actually enjoy being a parent instead of always being on guard. The apartment felt like a safe space again instead of somewhere that could be invaded anytime. Lily's hair grew back completely over those months. It was finally long enough for the pigtails she'd always wanted. Every morning before preschool, I'd sit her on the bathroom counter and carefully separate her hair into 2 sections, making them as even as possible. She'd watch in the mirror and smile at herself, touching the pigtails gently like she was afraid they might disappear. When my mother visited now, she'd tell Lily how cute she looked without reaching out to touch or fix anything. She'd just smile and compliment and then move on to playing. That showed more real progress than anything else because it meant she could appreciate Lily's appearance without needing to control it. Austin and I talked one night after Lily was asleep about maybe trying for another baby. The family situation felt stable and healthy for the first time since Lily was born. I told him I felt confident I could protect my children because I'd proven I'd do whatever was necessary to keep them safe. He agreed and said he'd watched me fight for Lily in ways that showed real strength, even when that strength looked ugly from the outside. We decided to stop preventing pregnancy and see what happened. I felt ready because the boundaries with my mother were solid now, and I knew how to enforce them if they ever got tested again. Having another child didn't scare me anymore because I understood my own power to protect my family. My mother and I settled into a pattern over the following months that felt strange but workable. She called before visiting instead of showing up unannounced. She asked permission before touching Lily or making plans. She respected when I said no without arguing or guilt trips. The boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish became routine parts of our interactions. She'd arrive at the agreed time, stay for the agreed duration, and leave without drama when the visit ended. We talked on the phone weekly about normal things like her garden and Lily's preschool activities. The conversations felt careful at first, both of us avoiding topics that might trigger old conflicts. But gradually, we found safe subjects we could discuss without tension. Our relationship would never be what it was before all this happened. I couldn't forget what she'd done to Lily, or how she'd gaslit me when I tried to protect my daughter. But we'd address the problems head-on instead of pretending they didn't exist. That honesty made our new dynamic healthier, even if it was less comfortable. 2 years passed, and Lily turned 5 with a full head of perfectly normal hair. The bald patches had filled in completely and grown out evenly. She had no memory of the plucking or the pain or the fear. Sometimes she'd ask why Grandma didn't babysit her anymore like other kids' grandmas did. I'd give her simple answers about Grandma learning to respect boundaries. Lily accepted this easily the way young children do and moved on to other questions. I was grateful every day that she'd been young enough when it happened that the trauma wouldn't define her childhood. She was happy and confident and loved having her hair braided for school. But I carried the memories with me constantly. I remembered finding those first bald patches and the sick feeling in my stomach. I remembered catching my mother with tweezers in hand while Lily cried. I remembered the gaslighting and the stalking and feeling completely powerless to protect my own child. Those memories would stay with me forever, even as Lily forgot. My mother proved over time that she could be the grandmother Lily deserved. She showed up for birthday parties and school performances. She brought appropriate gifts and offered helpful support without trying to control my parenting decisions. When I needed a babysitter for a few hours, she'd come over and follow my rules exactly. She played games with Lily and read books and did art projects. She never once touched Lily's hair or made comments about her appearance. She'd catch herself sometimes. I could see it. Her hand moving toward Lily's head before she'd stop herself and redirect. But she always stopped. She never violated the trust again. The consequences I'd given her through the eyebrow plucking had created real change. She'd learned that her actions had serious results, and that I would protect my daughter no matter what it took. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did to her eyebrows. People might judge me for it or say I went too far. They might say I should have just cut contact or gotten a restraining order, but I tried everything else first, and nothing worked. She had keys to my apartment and showed up everywhere I went. She gaslit everyone, including doctors and my own father. The revenge was the only thing that made her truly understand what she'd done to Lily. She had to experience the violation herself, the helplessness, the gaslighting, the public humiliation. Only then did she get it. The eyebrow plucking wasn't pretty or noble or something I'm proud of, but it worked when nothing else did. Now my daughter is safe and my family is healing in a real way. My mother respects boundaries and Lily is thriving, and I know I have the strength to protect my children from anyone who tries to hurt them. That's what matters most.